Okay, we had options expiration. We had the same situation we had on Thursday. The Dow was up 15.5 points, much flat. Well, the S&P and NASDAQ were down. S&P was down 8.5 points, down 0.16%. NASDAQ was down 0.8%. The Russell was up just under 0.25%. And the VIX was down 0.60%. The VIX and the S&P both got a Doji. Candles of indecision. The S&P 500 got a Doji on Friday, a candle of indecision. Started to get a sell-off there. On Thursday, we did not close below the previous day's bar, and we got a candle of indecision. We're still above the 10 and 20 period moving average. Doji on the S&P. We also got a Doji on the VIX. The one on the VIX looks more like a topping tail, so it's still possible to attempt to rally. But we broke the trend line on the 60-minute chart, back tested it. You got to get back above that trend line if you're going to try to rally. If it's a back test, it could be a continuation Doji, or it could be a continuation down to the 10. And then we still may try to come back up here and form a divergence on the RSI, even form a divergence on momentum, which rolled over on Friday, and form a divergence that looks something like that, very similar to what we had over here with this divergence before we rolled over and turned down there. That is forming a larger divergence with this peak back over here. And again, this may or may not be done yet. Momentum is still bullish. Trend signals are still bullish. It has to shift, and then it's got to spill over into the trend signals and turn them bearish if we're to see a reversal, if we're to see those negative divergences in the weekly time frame begin to play out. Going to play out, but the question is the top complete, and a divergence is still in the cards there on the 60-minute charts with the parallel boundary that I've talked about. That's this blue dotted line right here in the daily time frame, showing you the channels in the 60-minute time frame. Again, whether done here or one more push higher and then done, again, we'll be watching for a move with those weekly divergences that will give us a reversal here. If that happens, again, I think the likely target would be down here at the 4,900 area. You've got a possible head and shoulders topping pattern here that could be under construction. We could either be finished with the left side of the head formation or one more push higher and then get the right side of the head formation depending on how topping process plays out. Again, signals remain bullish. We know that the divergences are forming in the 60-minute or in the weekly time frame are going to play out. We could turn down further and form divergences here, form a divergence here and on the RSI. And on the RSI in the daily time frame, I talked about that, or even try to turn up immediately and have the divergence develop on the RSI, the daily time frame. But again, if we pull back to the 10 period, it still might be that we try to bounce up that 10 period and come back up here. So we'll be watching to see how this unfolds. And again, also, if we exclude the shadows down here, you still have a possible rising wedge pattern if we connect these two peaks right here, and again, exclude the shadows down over here. Something to be watching. Again, look at the RSI. The RSI peaked, it turned down, and we saw a little bit of a pullback here Thursday and Friday. Friday we get the Doji, S&P or NASDAQ got a spinning top. Pull back towards the 10 period or the trend line or something. We could still try to come back up here, but we may do it immediately if we attempt to make a new high. It could be, again, NASDAQ getting the bearish engulfing, and S&P really didn't. As I said, it was a sloppy pattern at best. Still may see them diverge from one another, where NASDAQ has peaked and S&P goes still higher. Still a possibility, but be watching to see if a divergence tries to develop with these RSIs or not. It doesn't have to. It certainly can. MACD has not rolled over yet here in the daily time frame. If we do tick back up and move up into this upper trend line or the channel on the 60-minute time frame, you still may see a little divergence develop here on the, I drew that higher, a divergence develop here on the RSI in the daily time frame. Again, we could see the same thing happen with the MACD histogram, which is the difference between the spread between the MACD line and the signal line, but it's still not going negative. And again, it still might try to tick back up and form a little divergence there before it does end up rolling over. We'll see what happens. But again, do we have the dojis be the doji here and the spinning top on NASDAQ be continuation, starts a reversal or a deeper pullback, and then we still go higher? Or again, seeing signals turn to where momentum shifts and then maybe a trend change takes place with the trending signals turning bearish. Right now, they're both bullish. Watching this RSI closely. I'll be watching to see if we get an MACD crossover at any time soon. Those major negative divergences developing on many, many different indicators in the weekly time frame on the S&P 500. As we got this doji on the S&P 500, saw the VIX get one as well, a doji. It looks more like a topping tail, but again, we went up towards the 50 period, the green line, and then we turned down off of it. We were positive at the lows of the session. Then the S&P clawed its way back up. Even though the S&P ended down, so did the VIX. The VIX ended down 0.60%. It's hovering at 13.20 right now. S&P's moved to new high. So far, the VIX has gotten a higher low, so there is a discrepancy. Sometimes discrepancies mark reversal points. We had the inverted hammer down here. We got back above the lower band, and again, we're above the band. We're above the 10. We're above the 20, just under the 50-period moving average. So again, if this pulls back a little bit, still further consolidation, we still might see the S&P try to go higher. And it'll be interesting if the S&P does it close below the upper Bollinger Band on the daily chart. But if it does attempt to go up, again, it does not have to. I've again drawn some channel lines that are just parallel channels that are speculation. We don't have to reach those levels. It may have the S&P may have a rising wedge, as I've shown you, and the close below the upper band may be it. Got to see signals begin to change, and we have not seen that happen yet. Watching, do we get further consolidation here? We did get a doji, the S&P and the VIX, candles of indecision. In order for the S&P 500 itself, we've got to see the VIX surge back above the 50-period moving average, back above the 200 here, be able to remain above that 50-period, the green line right there, if we're to have volatility on the S&P 500. If the MACD starts going positive on the VIX, then we could get a sell-off getting above the 50-period, having the MACD go into positive territory in the daily time frame. Stochastic this week, it turned back up. It turned back up late last week and remains pointing upward at this time for this week, our short trading week. Now, please consider supporting the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the indicators, if you like the charts, please let me know that by supporting the channel, by partnering with me. The money made on YouTube is through sponsorship. I get contacted and I turn those offers down because I don't want to sell you a bunch of stuff you don't need. I just put it all out there for free and just ask you to help out what you can. Rather just have a direct relationship with you. You need your help in order to make it work, so please consider helping out today. If you follow the link, you can donate any amount you want at a secured site. Make it a recurring donation. If you do that, I thank you. Please consider helping out at this time. I would really, really appreciate that. I do need your help at this time, so thank you for your consideration for that. If you check back on Sunday, I will be talking about indicators that I'm not talking about in this video. Momentum and trend signals. Currently, they are bullish at this time. I'll be watching to see if they change, forming that divergence on the S&P 500 and NASDAQ in those weekly time frames. Many different indicators. Check back. I will post that 7 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday. Again, remember I told you S&P and NASDAQ were making new highs. We saw new highs this week, but we're still seeing a Fibonacci retracement for the Dow. Dow has a possible double top pattern, also forming a possible bear flag pattern that may or may not be done. Again, we could still get a deeper Fibonacci retracement if we attempt to rally further. Got a black candlestick, candle of indecision here, kind of a spinning top looking candlestick there. The Dow turned off a trend line of that's 125 years old, where other tops have been marked. I've talked about it. Continue to monitor this. We're just under the 61.8 Fibonacci retracement of this decline, and Above it, you may go into the golden pocket and still set up a lower high. If the rally can continue, there is possibility of a bear flag being complete. Now, in my next update, I'll be talking about the weekly charts and just updating you on that. I'll be talking about the 9-count sell signal that has given us a sell-off so far in the daily time frame. But you have two bearish candle patterns that have formed on NASDAQ this week. You have a bearish engulfing that has yet to be confirmed here. We got to push below this level and the low here and see a solid push below that. Don't have that yet. You still may get it. But again, you've got a bearish engulfing in the daily. You get a Gravestone Doji in the weekly time frame here on the NASDAQ. And again, whenever you get a topping tail, you got to assume that's the top. Until proven otherwise, I'll talk about the possibility of divergences. But again, as I've been saying, it may be we start a reversal if our highs from this last week can hold. I'll be showing you in this video. So two bearish candlesticks, one in the weekly time frame, one in the daily. Confirmation is required for both of them. Confirmation being a confirmation and a follow through. And we've got the diversions going on. I'll be showing you these charts next update. But we've got the bearish Gravestone Doji into this red trend line parallel to the lower boundary here. We formed the negative diversions everywhere on the NASDAQ and S&P 500 weekly charts. Next update, I'll show you things I'm not showing you in this video, and I'll spend more time showing you the S&P weekly chart. Check back on Sunday, 7 a.m. Eastern time for that. But candlesticks forming in the weekly and the daily time frame on NASDAQ. We'll see what becomes of them. Now, same thing here. We saw momentum roll over on the daily chart. For the NASDAQ, we got a candle of indecision, just like on the S&P here, in the form of a spinning top. A little hard to see there. We pushed right below the trend line there. Could be breaking down and back testing on the intraday charts, on the 60-minute charts. Didn't quite reach that upper channel line, but this little tiny rising wedge, and also on the 60-minute chart, a channel. I've drawn this in on the 60-minute chart. You have this channel-looking price action in the bigger move here, the bigger channel and the head and shoulder formation. So one thing to consider, though, sometimes NASDAQ and S&P, they diverge at turning points. So we got this bearish engulfing on Thursday. Did not get confirmation today. We needed a good push below this low right here. We had an intraday push below it, but we didn't get a solid push below it on a closing basis. Still may do that, but if it's a continuation doji, spinning top, I should say. But one thing to consider is if we do sell off further and then rebound, say we rebound, does NASDAQ get a lower high and S&P move to a higher high and they diverge from one another? If we get a divergence forming on the RSI, something to consider. And again, we don't have to get a divergence on the RSI. There are many turning points that we haven't had it. August peak in 2022, we didn't have one on the S&P. Or recent bottom, we didn't have one. Have to have a divergence, but sometimes they form up. But here on NASDAQ, again, we're rolling over again. You ended up forming a divergence right here and going a little bit higher. And then we turned and got a pullback. Over here, we pulled back for a little while, but then went up and formed a larger divergence. See how this unfolds, but again, you've got those divergences in the weekly time frame that are warning a turning point is going to take place. How that will unfold could vary. I'll be watching to see if this candlestick is confirmed and gets a follow through. Candlesticks are meaningless, absolutely meaningless, unless you get confirmation and a follow through. You have a bearish engulfing here. Didn't quite cut the mustard there. With the bearish engulfing on the S&P, as I said in yesterday's video. Floppy pattern at best, but it really didn't meet the criteria, completely engulfing the pattern. So also a rollover here with momentum. Again, we'll see if a divergence develops there or if we start getting a bigger sell-off. Again, we did see the close below the upper Bollinger Bands on both the S&P and NASDAQ. If we're going to turn, we now have to see signals turn bearish, and that hasn't happened yet. On Friday, NASDAQ was down 0.26%, just over 0.25%, down about 52 points. We have same thing here with the RSI as the S&P has. Again, we saw an extreme. we began to turn down on the RSI, and we began to get a little bit of a pullback here, or a possible reversal. Watching as does a divergence end up developing here, or do we confirm a lower high? Do we sell off and get a lower high on NASDAQ? Turn up immediately, and maybe form the channel on those 60-minute charts, and no guarantee those channels have to develop. It's just I'm drawing parallel boundaries. Went through on Thursday, saw them here in the daily time frame. This here I just have the rising wedge, but again, we could see that immediately develop where we go higher and then end up turning down. So we'll see how it unfolds, but you do have those divergences in the weekly time frame telling us, again, the time is short. Something is going to happen. Watching the bearish engulfing here to see if it is confirmed and gets a follow through at some point next week. If it does not, then the candle is invalid. ACD, just like the S&P 500, has not rolled over yet. It also has moved to new high, just as the RSI has moved to a new high. We have these possible head and shoulder patterns. We'll be watching to see once we complete here, or if we already have, if we start making our way down towards this 17,000 area through the summer here. On the weekly chart, we have those divergences again with the weekly time frame, and again with this peak over here and the highs we're making right now. The same thing going on with prime parameter. Prime parameter is making a lower high. It hasn't rolled over yet. We'll have a reversal by the time it does roll over, but it will confirm it. But the fact that we're seeing this divergence here is warning that, again, time is short. So I'll be watching these RSIs. Again, do we just reach extremes, or do we end up forming divergences? We'll see how it unfolds. Is the Doji on the S&P and the spinning top here, are they continuation and then we go back up, or are they continuation immediately to the upside, or I should say to the downside, or do they mark a short-term bottom where we bounce and we go back up? We'll be watching these candles of indecision, watching to see if momentum signals begin to flip back to bearish. Remember, we had the 9-9 sell signals. We had it confirmed on the S&P 500 Monday. We got the 9-9 signal on the NASDAQ on Monday, and so far that has been the high on the NASDAQ, that 9-9 sell signal that formed. Sometimes you get the 9 counts, you go a little higher. Other times they play out immediately. Our NASDAQ's turned down with the 9 count. S&P went a little bit higher. Now I want to bring the S&P 500 up close because I want you to see this. Again, if we get a bigger pullback, NASDAQ's testing its 50 period, S&P is just above it, but we could pull back to the cloud. That would take us towards our 10 period in the daily time frame, and then still try to rebound. But get candles of indecision in the daily time frame. So do they continue the sell-off, or do they mark a short-term bottom and we attempt to rebound? Again, here in the 60-minute time frame, we had these two equal peaks right here, and that formed this divergence on the S&P 500 60-minute chart. NASDAQ made a lower high. It did not move above the Monday high. S&P did. So there is a divergence right now between the S&P and NASDAQ. And again, pay attention to when a divergence happens between the two, because sometimes the reversal point, if these highs hold, then that very well could, if signals start turning bearish and then remain that way. Again, we broke the trend line here on both S&P and NASDAQ. Could just be in backtest mode here. Again, we had a push down to this horizontal support. We bounced, we backtested, and here we are. It's under the momentum line and the momentum cloud. We got the trending cloud down here. You've got your 50 here at horizontal support. So again, do we attempt a rebound? We break this level and then attempt to rebound, or do we start a reversal, and does the high here hold? And that is certainly possible. You do have the divergence between NASDAQ and S&P. We're looking for clues, and again, if signals at some point next week to turn bearish with momentum and eventually trend signals remain that way, we'll be watching that divergence on the daily chart forms on the RSI or not. It may or may not. Too early to know. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Here we're at support. Are we getting a successful backtest and we start breaking this level, and then it acts as resistance and we start getting a bigger dump, and that's it? Or do we pull back and go up and make a divergence on that RSI in the daily time frame? That's certainly possible. Or do we attempt to do it right here, right now, get a divergence, and then start turning down, and again would form a divergence on NASDAQ 60-minute chart, which doesn't have one yet, and another reference point of a divergence here on the 60-minute chart of the S&P 500. If we're going to rebound right now, you got to get back above the broken trend line, back above the momentum line, the purple line there, and the momentum cloud. Directly below, again, our 50 period and our trending cloud. Below that, the 200 period way down here, and the support and resistance line here. Here, MACD. Now, NASDAQ's MACD is in the 60-minute time frame, is right there at the center line. Here we're just above it on the S&P. Does it turn back up? Again, you had this little divergence here. Does it turn back up? And we get one more reference point, and then that's all she wrote. We see the divergences on the RSI, another reference point on S&P, and a one setting up on NASDAQ. You go lower and then have it happen. Watch, I'll be showing you the signals. They turn bearish, S&P 500, quickly turn back to bullish, then a divergence is likely going to develop. Remain bullish, you could get the divergence right here now on S&P. If they turn bearish and remain that way and don't turn back to bullish, and again, the high could be in, we start a reversal. Now, if we just zoom out here, we can see, again, what I just talked about. We broke this accelerated trend line right here, possibly back testing it. We're stalling at the momentum line. Could get a bigger pullback and then still try to go higher. Could try to go higher immediately with our Doji candlestick. If it's a reversal, if it's a continuation of pullback and then turning back up, or it might just start a reversal. Again, we have that divergence between the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ now. But again, if we do go higher, we might come up towards these channel lines, and I've drawn some channels of speculation here connecting the low here and the low here in red. Here I've just drawn from this upper boundary here a parallel boundary with that, and if we get a rally, that could take us right up into that level and then turn down. That would be a nice looking channel on the S&P 500. A little bit bigger one from the lows back over here and here. The angle of descent, the angle of ascent, I should say, is slightly different. And again, here we would have it from this peak right here, just slightly above that area. But this is this red boundary of this channel. It really looks like a nice looking channel if, in fact, we get the rally early on next week, that you could rally towards this level. If you get back above the broken trend line, and then you could turn with that. That's certainly possible. And again, it would form a nice looking divergence in all likelihood on the RSI and the NASDAQ, which again, NASDAQ does not have one. You'd have a triple divergence with these two equal peaks here for S&P. And probably a pretty nice looking triple divergence on the MACD as well if we turn back up. So we'll be watching to see what happens. Again, in the 60-minute time frame, you start losing the 50 period and staying below it. You start losing the positive territory on the MACD, and it goes negative, then the momentum is down. You're holding above the 50 and it's pointing higher as it currently is. You can still bounce off of these levels and the momentum is up. So if we start breaking the 50 and then holding below it, then that's going to be bearish. You bounce off of it, that's going to be bullish. One more trend line to show you. If I remove the black trend line from the peak over here and use this peak as a reference point, drawing a parallel boundary here, slightly excluding the shadow right here, then again, you've got a really nice looking channel that might be done here with this peak, or we might go up and hit that level again, or the red boundary. But just some interesting trend lines, again, from these lows here, and then from these lows back over here, and from this high. Just looking at some of the possible channels that might be in play. Let me be clear, we don't have to go higher. Again, right here, we've got a channel that might be done, but it is still possible we push up a little bit higher for reversing with that divergence in the weekly time frame. You know, we did turn off this trend line, which I talked about in Thursday's update. We got a gap and trap, and we turned off to that level, and you have a potential rising wedge with that, again, with the of the trend line and possibly back testing. So again, either a bigger pullback and then another rally, or a reversal could start, one or the other. Just wanted to show you some of these channels, again, different levels that I'm looking at. These are probably likely, and again, this one would have us done or maybe go up into it one more time and then turn down. Spread one we haven't quite reached. Again, we had that little trend line break on the daily chart. Here it is on the 60-minute chart for NASDAQ 60-minute chart. Again, possible breakdown and back test if we start losing the cloud of the 50-period moving average, and again, seeing the MACD get a strong push into the negative region and remain there right here. It's right at the center line. So are we going to firm up here or go negative and then firm up, or go into the negative territory and get a bigger dump down towards the 200-period moving average? We do have the price having made a lower high, and the peak was on Monday, so there was no divergence right there. The S&P did get a little one. NASDAQ did not. It still may turn back up and attempt to hit this upper channel line that I've talked about. Again, no requirement we do so, but it is if we bounce off this area, off the trending cloud and the 50-period moving average, we still may try to go up here and then turn back down. I talked about this at great length in detail on Thursday. Will we form a divergence on that RSI? They're going to a new high. We don't have one yet on the NASDAQ. We have a small one that formed on the S&P 500. And remember, this week we saw NASDAQ make a lower high and S&P make a slightly higher high. So again, possible that not making new highs. It's just that at the moment it's still possible with these RSIs and the position that they're in. We could still see it go higher and form a divergence that looks something like what we had over here, where again you had a pullback and then you kind of went sideways a little bit and then you popped a little higher and then you got a sell-off. And looking at the weekly charts, a reversal is going to happen. It happens immediately, then it's possible we start seeing the sell-off. Still possible that we buy a little bit more time. Going to play out, still forming. Maybe they're done now with this week's highs. Maybe they're not. They are coming to a conclusion or maybe finished. They play out, they're going to produce a reversal. Because they don't play out immediately, they take their time forming in the weekly time frame. You only get 1 bar per week. We'll go, oh, the divergence was there last week and the week before and hasn't played out. Well, it wasn't done. 1 bar per week in the weekly time frame. Because it doesn't play out immediately, then again, the complacency grows even more. Look, my signals remain bullish. I show you my signals in every video. I also show you the signals that are forming the negative divergence in the weekly time frame and the monthly time frame. Are a huge warning sign as we're up at this key level of long-term resistance. So again, I'll be watching to see what becomes of the MACD. Does it firm back up and get a divergence? Does the RSI do it and we buy a little bit more time? And again, I've drawn the parallel boundary up here for the channel. We didn't quite reach it. Still may. Are we now turning down and we've got a break of the trend line and a back test and we start losing the 50 in the cloud and so forth? So do we bounce here off these levels of support? Do we bounce off the 50? Or do we start breaking these levels and getting a bigger dump, moving to fill the gap here, moving to fill the gap here, and moving towards our 200-period moving average and the trend line? You start seeing signals, momentum signals turn bearish, either starting a reversal or you're going to get the diversions where you sell off a little bit and then you come back up. And again, if the S&P forms a divergence and NASDAQ does not, that's going to be a huge red flag if that does in fact happen. I'm telling you, it could unfold in a couple of different ways. Divergences in the weekly time frame are going to play out. You're watching for the next set of bearish signals on momentum and the trend. That happens, it means that we're either going sideways to form the divergence or we're starting the reversal, one or the other. Assuming that we do form a divergence on the daily chart with the RSIs on the NASDAQ and S&P, and it may not. I'll be watching the RSI MACD here next week on the 60-minute charts. Now this chart, again, I just played with some trend lines here. Again, from this low to this low, I've drawn a parallel boundary from this area here to this area here, playing connect the dots. So again, you possibly have a channel done there. Black line, again, I took it from this high over here. We haven't quite reached it there. Again, we broke this trend line right here. We back tested it. We're at the 50, as I've said. So do we start breaking down, or is this trend line, do we go back up, take it out? Trend lines, we can see them redefine themselves, and boundaries change all the time. We are going to be watching to see what happens. We're coming towards the oversold area here. Extremes, do we recycle back up immediately or go down a little bit further? And again, you got the cloud here, the support and resistance line and that would be taking us towards the 10-period moving average, and then we try to bounce and get a lower high or a higher high. And again, lay out that way if our Doji and spinning top candlesticks on S&P and NASDAQ are continuation, could move back towards those 10-period moving averages for a test, go deeper into oversold territory, then recycle back up. What I'm watching is, do we stop making new highs? Do we stop making new highs? Do we go higher and end up making diversions? But some channels of speculation here, and again, along with that channel here and that rising wedge trend line from these levels back, and I drew that wrong, from these levels back over here, as you saw in the daily time frame.